Hello and welcome back to Seeking Glory, where we deep dive into the scriptures, wrestling with the tough questions and always seeking God's truth. Today we're tackling a passage that some people use to argue that God condones polygamy, 2 Samuel 12:8. Okay, let's have a look at the verse in question. So just for a bit of background, this is from the prophet Nathaniel's powerful rebuking of King David after his sin with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah. God says through Nathan, "I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your embrace, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that would have been too little, I would have added to you yet more things." Now, at first glance, it might seem like God is giving David wives, at least Saul's wives, and therefore endorsing polygamy. But is that what's really going on here? Absolutely not. To understand this passage, we need to consider the context, the nature of God's communication, and the overwhelming consistent witness of the Old Testament that shows the problems and consequences of polygamy. It's never, ever endorsed. Okay, first the context. So Nathan is not commending David's polygamy, he is confronting David's profound sin and highlighting his ingratitude. God is listing the many blessings he's already poured out on David: power, land, security, and the household of previous King Saul's wealth and property, which would have included inheriting the former king's wives as a sign of succession, a common practice in that ancient culture, though not necessarily a divine endorsement to marry them all. God is essentially saying, look, I gave you more than enough, yet you greedily took what was forbidden. It's a rhetorical device to underscore David's sin, not a stamp of approval. Now, I want to also add something here as well. If you look further, it's not saying that David ever married these women. It's actually just saying, well, I gave you your master's wives into your embrace. So what he does after this isn't exactly what God commends David to do. Now, of course, we can see in scripture like 1 Samuel 18-19 that David married one wife and then he received another wife later in 1 Samuel 25, for example. But what you're going to note here is that none of this was being commended by God, and this is really important. So when we come back to "and gave your master's wives into your embrace," this is God just saying, yes, I gave you Saul's wives for you to look after. You need to check out this word embrace. It means for you to look after. I'm going to stress that again, for you to look after. It wasn't talking anywhere here about any form of sexual relations nor marriage. So we need to understand that women, if left without a husband in these days, would have been left destitute. David was doing a noble thing by looking after them and inviting them into his court. Now, if you actually look a little bit later in 2 Samuel 20 verse 3, when David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he actually takes 10 of his concubines that he actually had under his care and he lets all of them go. He no longer sleeps with them, and instead they're just left in this house under guard. He realizes the issue of having multiple sexual partners due to what we're about to discuss. David, who had so many wives and concubines, experiences a severe consequence. In 2 Samuel 16:20-22, after David's sin with Bathsheba, Nathan prophesies the judgment. "Behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. He will lie with your wives in the sight of this son." That's son, S-U-N, by the way. Now, this terrible prophecy is fulfilled when David's son, Absalom, publicly defiles David's concubines as an act of usurping his throne and humiliation. This indecent profanity shames David's family and illustrates the brokenness and vulnerability caused by his multiple relationships. It's a vivid picture of divine judgment, not a blessing. Now, we need to also remember something. God had already ordained a one man, one woman back in the creation story. See, Genesis 2:24. This is a blueprint for marriage, and it's laid out very clearly. One man, one wife, joined together in one flesh. One. This is God's design for one man and one woman in a singular, lifelong union. Jesus himself even quotes this verse in Matthew 19, reaffirming its foundational importance. We also see further problems as well with multiple wives or concubines. In 1 Kings 11, 1-8, Solomon loved so many foreign women that it actually causes problems later on. His heart was stirred against God, and in fact, he suffers the consequences of his sin. So Solomon purportedly had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which directly violated Deuteronomy 17:17, which we'll look at in a bit. The severe consequence was that his numerous foreign wives would lead his heart astray, eventually leading to internal civil war and the division of his kingdom after his death. This is the ultimate explicit consequence of multiple wives. Exactly what God had said not to do to avoid particular reasons such as this. So, coming back to Deuteronomy 17:17, it speaks specifically about how a king would rule over Israel. And it states, "Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, that his heart not turn away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold." Look, it's very clear here. God never condoned multiple wives. Just because God is not responding to something doesn't mean that the Bible is condoning it. We will later, through reading, always find a consequence of a fleshly or human action. In fact, I want to bring up another problem of having multiple wives. Rachel and Leah, Genesis 29-30. The story of Jacob, Rachel and Leah is a prime example of issues that are going to occur with multiple wives. Jacob loved Rachel more, leading to an intense jealousy and rivalry between the sisters. They competed for Jacob's affection for children, even using their maidservants as surrogates to produce more children. This household was full of bitterness, manipulation, and distress. And this was a direct result of Jacob, though the scenario was very different, as Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah, but even still, he should have looked after her properly, for it is in the law that you should not favour one child over another or one wife over another. You have to treat them both equally with love, but clearly this is impossible for us humans to do. And if you read this further in your own time, you will remember that God starts blessing the one to whom Jacob is not loving much. So, does 2 Samuel 12:8 endorse polygamy? No. It's a passage of divine rebuke. When we examine the full counsel of the Old Testament, from God's creation blueprint to explicit commands, and the tragic consequences seen in the lives of his creation, and indeed chosen kings, the message is clear. God's ideal and desire is for monogamy. One man, one woman. Polygamy? No, that was not part of his design. Now, I really hope that this helped you. God bless you and praise Christ.